2:08 a.m. Ain al-Asad Air Base, Anbar Province, Western Iraq. The desert is cold and absolutely silent at this hour. Temperatures dropping to 6 degrees Celsius. A dry wind coming out of the northwest carrying fine sand that coats every surface and makes the stars above look slightly blurred, slightly distant. The base itself covers 23 square kilometers of hardened concrete, reinforced hangars, fuel farms, ammunition depots, and the kind of infrastructure that only a major military power builds when it intends to stay somewhere for a long time. Ain al-Asad is home to approximately 2,500 American military personnel, Air Force crews, Army advisors, special operations teams, and the support structure that keeps all of them operational in one of the most complex strategic environments on Earth. It is also, at 2:08 a.m., 43 seconds away from the opening salvo of the largest coordinated Iranian military strike ever attempted against a U.S. installation on foreign soil. In Tehran, the operation had been in planning for 26 months. Its architects, senior brigadier generals of the IRGC Aerospace Force, working in concert with Quds Force operational planners and the commander of Iran's ballistic missile program, had studied Ain al-Asad with the thoroughness that professionals apply to a problem they intend to solve permanently. They knew the base's layout from commercial satellite imagery, supplemented by human intelligence reporting from sources inside Anbar province. They knew the locations of the Patriot PAC-2 battery that constituted the base's primary air defense layer. They knew the approximate response times of the base's quick reaction alert aircraft. They knew the sectors of the base that were most vulnerable to blast damage: the fuel storage areas, the munitions depots, the aircraft parking aprons where U.S. Air Force assets sat in the open between missions. And they had built an attack package designed to overwhelm every layer of the base's defense simultaneously. The package was the product of 26 months of planning and 4 years of weapons development and stockpiling. 31 Fateh 313 ballistic missiles, Iran's most accurate short-range system, GPS and optically guided, with a circular error probable of under 10 meters, assigned to the base's highest value fixed targets: the main runway intersection, the Patriot battery site, the fuel storage complex, the primary aircraft hangar cluster, and the base command and intelligence facility. Simultaneously, 44 Shahed 136 loitering munitions, the Iranian-designed kamikaze drones that had proven devastatingly effective in other theaters, launched from dispersed sites across western Iran and from IRGC proxy positions in western Iraq, programmed to arrive over the base in a continuous stream across a 20-minute window, to sustain the attack beyond the initial ballistic salvo, and threading through it all, 18 Quds 3 cruise missiles, terrain following, sea skimming at altitude over the desert, each carrying a 400-kilogram warhead, launched from mobile platforms in Khuzestan province and from fixed launch sites in Ilan province, their flight paths calculated to approach Ain al-Asad from the northwest, the direction least covered by the base's existing Patriot radar coverage. 93 attack elements, ballistic missiles from the east, cruise missiles from the northwest, drones from multiple vectors, all of them timed to arrive in overlapping waves designed to exhaust the Patriot battery's reload cycle and saturate the base's close-in defenses before the last elements arrived. In Tehran, the IRGC commander, who had signed the final operational order, believed he had designed the attack that would end American military presence in Iraq, not through a single catastrophic blow, though the damage would be severe, but through the demonstration that no American base in the region was safe, that the cost of maintaining a presence in Iraq had become intolerable, and that the domestic political pressure in Washington would do the rest. He had studied American domestic politics carefully. He believed he understood the breaking point. He had made 6 catastrophic mistakes. First mistake: the ballistic missile launches were detected at ignition plus 3 seconds. The space-based infrared system satellites that monitored Iranian territory had been tasked at surge priority for 11 days following intelligence indicators that a major IRGC Aerospace Force operation was in its final preparation phase. The SBIRS constellation's coverage of Western Iran was optimized, and the detection algorithms had been specifically tuned in the preceding week to reduce the minimum detectable launch signature threshold. When 31 Fateh 313 motors ignited within a 90-second window, at 2:07 a.m. Iranian time, the SBIRS network registered all 31 launches within 8 seconds of the first ignition. The alert reached U.S. Forces Iraq, CENTCOM, and the White House Situation Room within 40 seconds of the first launch. al-Asad's Air Defense Operations Center received the warning with 2 minutes and 7 seconds before the first missile impacted. At al-Asad, 2 minutes and 7 seconds is enough. Second mistake. The Patriot battery had been upgraded and reinforced without Iran's knowledge. The PAC-2 system that Iranian intelligence had catalogued at al-Asad, the system whose response timelines and magazine depth the IRGC planners had carefully modeled, had been replaced 6 weeks earlier by a PAC-3 MSE battery, the most advanced variant of the Patriot system in U.S. inventory. The PAC-3 MSE has a dramatically higher hit-to-kill probability against short-range ballistic missiles, a faster engagement timeline, and a larger magazine capacity than the past two. Iran's attack mathematics, the calculation that 31 ballistic missiles would exhaust the Patriot's intercept capacity, had been computed against the wrong system. Additionally, a second Patriot battery, a PAC-3 unit from the 1st Battalion, 7th Air Defense Artillery, had been quietly transported to al-Asad and positioned in a complementary firing sector 14 days before the attack, specifically in response to intelligence indicating that an Iranian ballistic missile strike on an Iraqi-based U.S. facility was being planned. 2 Patriot PAC-3 MSE batteries. Iran's planners had modeled 1 PAC-2. Third mistake. The drone launch sites in western Iraq had been under surveillance for 8 days. The IRGC proxy networks in Anbar and Nineveh provinces that had pre-positioned Shahed 136 loitering munitions at dispersed rural launch sites had been tracked by a combination of MQ-9 Reaper drones operating from al-Asad itself and by CIA-coordinated collection against IRGC Quds Force communications traffic. By the time the first Shahed 136 was launched at 1:58 a.m., 10 minutes before the ballistic missiles, to achieve the timed arrival sequencing the IRGC planners had designed, U.S. forces already had 15 of the 31 Iraq-based drone launch sites under active surveillance. F-16 CJs from al-Assad's own 55th Fighter Squadron had been scrambled at 1:44 a.m., 24 minutes before the attack began, in response to the first indications of pre-launch activity detected by the MQ-9s. They were airborne and armed before the first Shahed left its launch rail. Fourth mistake. The cruise missile approach from the northwest had been anticipated. The specific threat axis that IRGC planners believed would defeat al-Assad's Patriot coverage, the northwest approach corridor through the Syrian desert, had been identified as a likely Iranian attack vector in a classified CENTCOM threat assessment completed 4 months earlier. In response, an AN/T PY2X band radar, the same forward-based radar that serves as the primary sensor for THAAD systems, had been positioned at al-Assad's northwestern perimeter on a temporary forward basing arrangement with specific responsibility for coverage of the northwest threat axis. The 18 Quds-3 cruise missiles flying the route that Iran believed was undefended were flying directly toward the most capable mobile radar the U.S. Army operated. Fifth mistake. USS Dwight D. Eisenhower was in the Red Sea. The carrier strike group, operating in support of Operation Prosperity Guardian, was 340 miles southwest of Ain al-Asad, well within range of her strike aircraft for a counter-strike mission against the targets in western Iran. She had been placed on enhanced alert status 4 days earlier, following the same intelligence indicators that had prompted the Patriot upgrade and the AN/TPY-2 positioning. When the Spears alert went out at 2:07 a.m., USS Eisenhower's air wing was already at 15-minute alert status. In practice, the first aircraft were on the catapults in 8 minutes. Sixth mistake. The base was not sleeping. Ain al-Assad's force protection posture had been elevated to ThreatCon Delta, the highest level, 36 hours before the attack, following intelligence reporting that assessed an Iranian strike was imminent. Personnel had been briefed. Hardened shelters had been identified and pre-stocked. Aircraft that could not be immediately launched had been moved into the reinforced hangars whose blast doors could withstand anything short of a direct hit. The fuel farm's emergency isolation valves had been tested, and their operators were at their stations. The base was not a soft target waiting to be surprised. It was a hardened installation in a pre-alert posture, run by people who had been told something was coming and had spent 36 hours making their preparations. What happened in the next 39 minutes was the most comprehensive defeat of an Iranian military operation in the history of the Islamic Republic. At 2:08 a.m., the SBIRS warning converted from alert to action. Ain al-Assad's Air Defense Operations Center, a hardened buried facility staffed around the clock by Patriot fire control officers who had been at their consoles since ThreatCon Delta was declared, received the launch data. 31 inbound ballistic tracks. Time to impact: 2 minutes, 4 seconds on the nearest element. The fire control officers did not scramble. They executed the engagement sequences they had been briefed to execute, in the order they had planned, against the threat axes they had anticipated. The 2 PAC-3 MSE batteries opened fire simultaneously. The eastern battery, oriented toward Iran, engaged the Fateh 313 missiles on their inbound trajectories with sequenced intercept fire, launching PAC-3 MSE rounds in pairs against each incoming track with the overlapping engagement geometry that maximized kill probability. The northwest battery engaged the tracks coming from oblique angles and from the Syrian desert approach. Its fire control solution fed by the AN/TPY-2 forward radar, whose coverage precisely filled the gap that Iran had planned to exploit. Fateh 313 is an accurate missile. It is also a relatively slow re-entry vehicle by ballistic missile standards. Its terminal velocity and trajectory profile fall well within the PAC-3 MSE's engagement envelope. In operational testing, the PAC-3 MSE achieves intercept probabilities against this class of target that approach 95% in optimal conditions. The conditions at Ain al-Asad at 2:08 a.m. were not optimal. There was sand haze, there was atmospheric turbulence from the cold desert wind, and there were 31 simultaneous tracks requiring continuous engagement sequencing. Despite these conditions, the 2 PAC-3 batteries engaged all 31 ballistic missiles in the inbound salvo. 28 were destroyed in flight. Clean intercepts, the kill vehicles impacting the warheads at closing velocities that converted them into expanding clouds of inert debris above the desert. 3 missiles survived their intercept attempts. 1 PAC-3 round missed its aim point by a margin that resulted in proximity damage insufficient to destroy the warhead. And 2 engagement sequences were disrupted by a brief electronic countermeasure pulse that one of the Fateh 313 missiles carried in an attempt to blind the Patriot's guidance system. The 3 surviving missiles impacted Ain al-Asad. 1 detonated in the aircraft parking apron, destroying 2 F-16CJs that had not been moved to hardened shelters in time. 1 impacted the base perimeter berm in the southwestern sector, its warhead detonating in open ground. 1 struck a logistics warehouse on the base's eastern side, destroying a fuel bladder storage facility and igniting a fire that took 40 minutes to extinguish. No personnel sheltering in hardened facilities were killed. 3 personnel in the open were wounded by blast and fragmentation. They survived. 3 impacts. 2 aircraft destroyed. 3 wounded. Against 31 ballistic missiles, the cruise missiles arrived from the northwest at 2:19 a.m., 11 minutes into the engagement. 18 Quds 3 cruise missiles at terrain following altitude, approaching through the desert darkness from Syria at 560 kilometers per hour. The AN/TPY-2 forward radar had been tracking them since they crossed into Iraqi airspace 24 minutes earlier. The data had been continuously fed to both PAC-3 batteries and to the base's NASAMS, the Norwegian Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile System that had been positioned on al-Asad's perimeter as a medium-range complement to the Patriot systems. NASAMS fires the AIM-120 AMRAAM, the same missile carried by U.S. fighter aircraft, in a ground-launched configuration with a range and engagement ceiling adequate for the cruise missile threat profile. The NASAMS engaged the cruise missiles at maximum range, its 4 firing units launching in a coordinated sequence that assigned 2 AMRAAM rounds to each inbound track. 14 cruise missiles were destroyed by NASAMS in the outer engagement zone. 4 survived and continued inbound. 2 were engaged by the PAC-3 Eastern Battery as they entered Patriot coverage. 1 was destroyed. 1 was missed. It impacted the base fuel farm, detonating its 400-kilogram warhead against a partially isolated fuel storage berm. The explosion and fire were significant, a column of orange flame visible for 30 miles. al-Asad's fuel storage capacity was reduced by approximately 30%. The fire burned for 3 hours. No personnel were killed. 0 deaths. 1 fuel farm hit. Against 31 ballistic missiles and 18 cruise missiles, the drone swarm was handled across 2 domains simultaneously. The F-16CJs scrambled before the attack destroyed 17 Shahid 136 drones at their launch sites, or in initial climb-out using AGM-65 Maverick missiles and gun runs against targets identified by real-time MQ-9 relay data. Additional F-16CJs launched during the ballistic engagement and joined the suppression effort. By 2:40 a.m., 29 of the 44 Shahid 136 drones positioned in Iraq had been destroyed before reaching attack profiles. The remaining 15 approached the base. 11 were killed by the Army's Coyote counter-drone interceptor system, at ranges between 2 and 8 kilometers from the perimeter. 3 were destroyed by 30mm autocannon from perimeter Stryker vehicles. 1 reached the base interior and impacted a vehicle maintenance depot, destroying 4 trucks and injuring 1 specialist who survived. 1 injury. 1 maintenance depot hit. Against 44 Shahid 136 drones at 2:14 a.m., 6 minutes after the first Fateh 313 impacted, USS Dwight D. Eisenhower launched her first strike package. 14 aircraft in 11 minutes, 8 FA-18E Super Hornets, 4 EA-18G Growlers, 2 E-2D Advanced Hawkeyes, 8 F-35C. Lightning IIs followed 6 minutes later, each carrying a full strike load. The EA-18G Growlers reached their jamming stations over western Iran at 2:41 a.m. and activated simultaneously, flooding the IRGC Aerospace Force's communications and fire control frequencies with broadband noise. Iranian air defense network coherence across the western operational area began degrading immediately. The F-35Cs led the strike package into Iranian airspace at low altitude and 0 radar cross-section. Their targets were the Fateh 313 launch facilities in Elam and Khuzestan provinces, the hardened launch preparation areas, the missile assembly buildings, the propellant storage facilities, and the command posts from which the launch sequences had been executed. 16 JASSM-ER missiles were released from beyond the engagement envelope of any surviving Iranian air defense system. All 16 impacted their targets between 2:53 a.m. and 3:01 a.m. The Fateh 313 launch infrastructure in Ilam province was destroyed. The assembly facility in Khuzestan was destroyed. The propellant storage complex, holding enough solid fuel propellant for an additional estimated 40 missiles, erupted in a secondary explosion that was registered on seismometers in Kuwait. The Super Hornets targeted the Quds 3 cruise missile launch infrastructure in a simultaneous strike. 12 2,000-pound JDAM bombs targeted the fixed launch site facilities in Ilam province and the mobile launcher support infrastructure. The transporter vehicles, the fuel trucks, the communications vans that had been tracked to their post-launch dispersal positions by signals intelligence in the 40 minutes between launch and the U.S. strike. 8 of 12 mobile support vehicles were destroyed. The fixed facilities were destroyed. USS Florida, the Ohio-class cruise missile submarine on continuous alert in the Gulf of Oman, received her Tomahawk strike order at 2:17 a.m. and began firing at 2:19 a.m. 36 Tomahawks targeted the IRGC Quds Force facilities in western Iraq. Supply depots, safe houses, communications relay points, and vehicle parks from which drone equipment had been distributed. 22 facilities in Anbar and Nineveh provinces were struck between 2:33 a.m. and 2:41 a.m. The proxy infrastructure that had taken 2 years to build was dismantled in 8 minutes. MQ-9. Reapers operating continuously from Ain al-Asad tracked and struck Shahed 136 launch teams in western Iraq through the early morning. By 4 a.m., 37 of the 44 launch sites had been struck. The drone capability that Iran's proxies had built over 4 years in Iraq was reduced to scattered debris across the Anbar Desert. The full accounting, compiled by U.S. Forces Iraq and CENTCOM by dawn. 31 Iranian Fateh 313 ballistic missiles launched. 28 intercepted in flight. 3 impacts, 2 aircraft destroyed, 3 personnel wounded, 1 logistics building destroyed. 18 Quds 3 cruise missiles launched. 17 intercepted. 1 impact, fuel farm partially damaged. 44 Shahed 136 drones launched, 43 destroyed before or shortly after reaching base. 1 impact. Vehicle maintenance depot, 1 minor injury. Total U.S. personnel killed, 0. Total U.S. personnel wounded, 4. All survived, all returned to duty within 72 hours. In retaliation, Fateh 313. Launch infrastructure in Ilam and Khuzestan provinces destroyed. Quds 3 cruise missile, fixed launch sites destroyed. 8 mobile launcher support vehicles destroyed. IRGC Quds Force proxy infrastructure across the 22 facilities in western Iraq destroyed. Propellant storage complex in Khuzestan destroyed in secondary explosion. IRGC Aerospace Force. Regional command communications disrupted. Estimated IRGC and proxy personnel killed across all strikes. 191. Ain al-Asad Air Base resumed full flight operations at 6:15 a.m. The fuel fire was extinguished at 5:22 a.m. The 2 destroyed F-16CJs were written off. The runway was undamaged. The hangars were undamaged. The command and intelligence facility, a primary Fateh 313 target, was untouched. At 6:15 a.m., the first operational F-16CJ of the day took the runway at Ain al-Asad and went to military power. The sound of its engine rolled across the desert to the east, toward the Iranian border, 260 miles away. It was not a statement. It was simply the base doing what the base does, flying missions every day, regardless of what the previous night had brought. The statement was in the flying itself. The base was open. The aircraft were airborne. The presence of the United States military in western Iraq was uninterrupted and undiminished. In Tehran, the IRGC commander, who had signed the operational order, watched his battle damage assessment arrive over 3 hours of fragmentary and increasingly grim reporting. 28 of 31 ballistic missiles intercepted, 17 of 18 cruise missiles destroyed, 43 of 44 drones killed, 0 Americans dead, the base operational by dawn, and simultaneously his launch infrastructure destroyed, his proxy network in Iraq obliterated, his propellant storage burning in a secondary explosion that would take weeks to assess and months to replace. The operation that was supposed to end American military presence in Iraq had killed 0 Americans, and the American response had killed 191 IRGC and proxy personnel, destroyed 4 years of proxy infrastructure, and eliminated the missile and drone launch capability that made the attack possible. This is what happens when you attack an American airbase. You do not find a base sleeping in the desert, unaware and unprepared. You find a base that has been at ThreatCon Delta for 36 hours. You find 2 Patriot PAC-3 MSE batteries, where you calculated 1 PAC-2 would be. You find an AN/TPY-2. Radar filling exactly the coverage gap you designed your cruise missile approach to exploit. You find F-16 CJs already airborne, killing your drones before they reach their attack profiles. You find a carrier strike group launching aircraft 6 minutes after your first missile leaves its launcher and striking your launch infrastructure before your last drone has reached the target. You find that 93 weapons achieve 4 impacts and 0 deaths, and that the response destroys in one morning what you spent 26 months building. Al-Asad flies on, as it always has, as it always will.